Let's jump right in. Most of you have probably seen this, so I'll just give you some quick context. The Atlantic. Trump, Americans who died in war are losers and suckers. The president has repeatedly disparaged the intelligence of service members and asked that wounded veterans be kept out of military parades. Multiple sources tell The Atlantic. Now, for me, I just call complete BS because it's too cartoonishly evil. Like, the writers, whatever the smear is, and they didn't do a good job of making something plausible.
There's no possibility in my mind that a president wouldn't, or Trump specifically, wouldn't want disabled veterans front and center because they're the best example of, look, they lost, this is how much they sacrificed. Take a picture with me. I'm the commander in chief. This is an opportunity for them to look great with the populace. So that part I think is just absolutely ridiculous.
Not only that, but didn't at the RNC, they had a bunch of wounded vets stand?
At the State of the Union, he had that North Korean refugee who had his leg run over by a railroad, and he stood up and held his crutch.
Wow.
Up. That was a very powerful image, and Trump pointed him and applauded.
This is cartoonishly evil.
As someone who's an actual comic book supervillain, there's been a comic book written about me. This is something that I kind of aspire to in a sense. But the Atlantic has been a very malignant organization, an outlet for over a century at this point.
Really?
So a lot of people don't realize the history of the Atlantic. And should I get into it now? Because
let's do one more paragraph.
Yeah, please.
So
please.
people, yeah. So they go on to say that Trump, in the first paragraph, they say Trump canceled a visit to the Aisne-Marne American Cemetery in Paris. He blamed rain for the last-minute decision, saying the helicopter couldn't fly. They go on to say neither claim was true. Now, I got to point out, Jason Leopold from BuzzFeed has the FOIA request from the Navy. They've got numerous communications saying the ceiling's too low, visibility's too low, we're not going to be able to do this.
And John Bolton, in his memoir, also independently described this event. And John Bolton, his memoir, was out to at the very least, not be flattering to Trump. And he describes in the circumstance of this event exactly as President Trump later claimed the circumstances were. So you have independent, like 6 months ago, 3 months ago, corroboration of Trump's version of the events. You would think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you would think they would mention Bolton's version.
Right. Yeah. Unless the intention was to be so cartoonishly bad,
right.
Every conservative would be like, it's so obviously fake that it's they're dangling keys in front of a baby, and the conservatives ran right to it, and the narrative of the violent riots and all the chaos in the streets and the Antifa killer is gone.
Yeah, there's an enormous wing of conservatism, which I have very mixed feelings about, whose entire modus operandi is freaking out over whatever it is the liberals are doing today. And it does an enormous disservice because, like you're saying, it's a very easy bait and switch. Like, which of these two things are, in the grand scheme of things, a bigger issue? That people are getting killed by the police, rightly or wrongly, that chaos is descending, rightly or wrongly, or the president 2 years ago said a nasty comment.
Said naughty words.
In the context of this presidency where, I mean, the number of nasty comments that he said has been innumerable and will be in history books one day, hopefully.
And this is probably like, these are maybe actually not even the worst things he's ever said.
Of course. I mean, this is what they did very cleverly in this is that everyone very vividly remembers in 2015 when he was referring to John McCain. I was on Gutfeld show that day referring to John McCain's military service. And he's like, I like the ones who didn't get captured.
Right.
And everyone thought, okay, this is the end of the Trump train because you can't attack the military within a Republican context. And it turns out the Republicans hated John McCain more than they hate making fun, tongue-in-cheek, of military service, and it cost him absolutely nothing other than perhaps an invite to John McCain's funeral.
Right. But because of that, it planted the seed in a lot of people's minds that Trump would call a service member a loser.
Right. Because it's plausible.
Right. I mean, I would disagree a little bit. I would say some people have heard the story where he called John McCain a loser and said other people who weren't captured. If they're not paying attention, they hear this, and a lot of them are probably like, I can't believe he would say, wow. Like, I can't believe it in the sense that they believe it. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
For me, I look at this and I'm like, oh, come on, man. Trump has been campaigning since he got elected. He got elected in 2016, and then he kept having rallies nonstop.
Right.
He's been in full campaign mode, and like you mentioned, he's had wounded vets at his rallies.
Of course.
This is cartoonishly, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But there's one more thing I want to point out, and then we could hear about what's up with this and the Atlantic. They mentioned that Trump said he didn't understand why the United States would intervene on the side of the allies, and that he asked who were the good guys. You know what I find wrong with that is who were the good guys? Us.
No, but see, this is why I think that's something he could have said. If he meant who were the good guys, Germany or England or Italy or Germany, it was not a war of good versus evil. It was a war of like kings versus shahs and versus kaisers. It's like, why are we involved here? And it's a question that has never been answered to our satisfaction to this day. So yeah, that's a very fair question. This isn't a clear-cut good guys versus bad guys. This is, why are we there to begin with?
I think
because of the Atlantic.
Because of the Atlantic.
Because of the Atlantic, yes.
Really? So this whole story goes full circle.
Yes, that's the.
Let's go. Let's do it. Bring on the history lesson.
There's someone named Randolph Bourne, and Randolph Bourne is a very interesting, largely forgotten historical figure. He was the first person who was a journalist who was handicapped, who talked about being handicapped. This is something where handicapped people were invisible before, and he brought that to public attention. He died in the Spanish flu epidemic of, I think it was 1918 or 1920, because of his disabilities. He was a dwarf and kind of misshapen. His lung capacity wasn't what it could have been, and he invented the term war is the health of the state. And what was happening during the Great War, remember Woodrow Wilson campaigned on, he kept us out of war. The idea that we'd be involved in a war in Europe completely violated the Monroe Doctrine. This had been something that had been the United States policy for 140 years. George Washington, in his farewell address, which was written by Alexander Hamilton, said, avoid foreign entanglements. So we're going to go to save like Serbia against Italy, against the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It made absolutely no sense on American principles. How do you get Americans to change their minds? Well, we all talk about in school about yellow journalism and William Randolph Hearst, the Spanish-American War, Remember the Maine. What they forget about is they act like somehow that changed. Like there's yellow journalism and then we don't talk about it and now everyone's objective. It's been the same yellow journalism for 100 years and more. The bloodlust of the establishment, in which I include the corporate press, cannot be overstated. And what happened with the Great War is, for the first time, all the lefties became, we need to get involved, we need to be the policeman of the world. William Jennings Bryan, who had been 3 times previously the Democratic nominee, who was a big left-wing populist, he's the one who brought like strong religion to politics. He was Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State. He was a pacifist. He resigned over this issue. Wow. So you can't, the thing is, you cannot, to this day, as president, get people into war unless the press prepares them for it, even if you have a draft. So what happened is all these lefties all of a sudden had huge ideas about, wait a minute, if we get into World War I, that will give us an excuse to micromanage the economy from A to Z. It had been bubbling under since the early 1900s, and now we have an excuse. We can imagine what it would look like if America was like a factory centrally managed from DC. Randolph Bourne was the only one who said, John Dewey, Walter Lippmann, they were all there. John Dewey, Randolph Bourne was the only one who said, this is crazy. This is not what progressivism is about. We're not about going overseas to fight on behalf of kings. What are you talking about? And they started saying, well, he's a cripple. You shouldn't listen to anything he has to say. He's crippled in body, he's crippled in mind. It was extremely offensive. Same thing happened later with Helen Keller. Yeah. Helen Keller was a radical communist, and they said, oh, well, now of course she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's mentally disabled. And she's like, I'm not mentally disabled. I'm deaf, dumb, and blind, but my mind is fine. Like, yeah, okay, there. Go in the corner. So this is a pattern with people on the left. You're either with us or you're just someone who could be tossed in the garbage. Right. And the Atlantic was one of the big, and he became completely blacklisted. So, of course, once he starts speaking out about getting us into World War I, which makes no sense, which really destroyed so much lives, for what purpose, he was blacklisted. John Dewey wouldn't work with him. John Dewey was like the big leftist intellectual at the time. And they all signed on and sold their souls. And that was the big, this is why Woodrow Wilson, I think, is universally among the correct people, regarded as the worst president in history. Became
among the correct people.
Yeah, became this is when America became globalist, and he was the first second American president to leave America as president. Teddy Roosevelt visited the Panama Canal. He went to Europe. The idea of a president leaving America was you would never think of it before, because the whole point of a president is to stay in your country. Now every president's getting on jet every other weekend. This was not the role of the president. He's supposed to be here and hold the fort, and I use the term fort advisedly. So the Atlantic has a lot of explaining to do, which they never have had to do, for all their pro-war propaganda. And here's where it gets even more evil. Deborah Lepstadt did an amazing book called Beyond Belief. And the premise of this book was about what the press was covering as Hitler rose to power in Germany. Now, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have YouTube, anything like that. So they're getting all these reports, and these reports of what Hitler and the Nazis were doing you don't really have cameras even that much to that extent, seemed crazy and implausible. Oh, maybe people, and they pointed to all the war propaganda from World War One when they talked about how evil the Kaiser was. This was a world where the Kaiser is the most evil human being on earth, and that was later proven to be false. So they're like, listen, we heard this 20 years ago. Wow. You guys lied about the Hun and how the Hun's killing people and raping everyone. Oh, and now Hitler's here and now he's doing these things. Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. And this is a major impediment in stopping Hitler's rise to power. And you can lay the blame at agencies like The Atlantic, the New Republic, and all these other depraved and malfeasant outlets.
This is actually a challenge right now with China.
Yes.
So with what they're doing with the Uyghur Muslims and all that.
Yes.
I've actually had people ask me, yeah, but certainly you don't think war is the answer and things like that. Well, not necessarily, but we do have to recognize the things that they're doing. The videos we've seen, the reports that are coming out of China are horrifying. But what do we do? And I think a lot of people are now in this kind of purgatory where, yeah, we've been lied to too much.
Yes.
The media's gung-ho, go war. I think what Trump's the first president in a long time, no new wars.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that made me kind of turn on, okay, when he tried to pull the troops out of Afghanistan and bring our troops back. And I've heard opinions from a lot of people, but there is a real challenge in when is war appropriate. I would personally say, yeah, World War II was something Hitler should have been stopped a long time ago. It should have never gotten to that point. I didn't know that about how the fake news essentially impeded.
This book, Beyond Belief, is just absolutely mind-boggling. It's just amazing because she very much defends the press in the sense of you can understand why they were so skeptical because they heard it all 20 years ago. And this is Germany. This is a civilized country. They're going to be acting like they're going to be beating up old people in the street. Okay, come on. Let's have some perspective. And it was true.
The corporate press.
Yes, the corporate press is the enemy of the people, and that is the moderate. That is the moderate position.
Wow, you think so?
Yes.
I mean,
they've been at it for over 100 years. And I wrote this piece for The Observer a couple of years ago about Obama in the tan suit. And I said it's very useful to have a president like Trump who's regarded as a buffoon. Because if you have a president who's widely respected, you will smile and nod when he sends your kids to war to die overseas for sometimes no reason. There's an amazing traveling exhibit, which I saw at UT Austin, called The Great War, which is about World War I. And I left it crying because you have all these letters from these kids. 17, 18. Hey, Mom, we're in Brussels. Everything's cool. And the plaque is like, he died next week. For what? Wow. For what? The amount of... plastic surgery was invented as a result of World War I.
Because of all the disfigurements.
Because everyone came back disfigured, like chopped up, because it's the first time you had human bodies meeting with the Industrial Revolution that created these machines.
Wow.
It was just absolutely horrific what was done to all these kids. The amount of bloodlust that was at Ypres Field. And there's just one more thing. There's a very, very beautiful, very, very evil poem, which they love in Canada, called In Flanders Fields. And the point of this poem, if you want, you could pull it up, it's pretty short, is it's speaking from the voices of the dead. And it's saying, we're lying here where the poppies grow. Are you going to let us die in vain? Come over and join us.
Wow.
So the idea is like, you're not going to let all these people who die for no reason. You have to die also, because otherwise our deaths were pointless. It's so sinister when you sit down and think about it. And there was a principle at the time that to be a real man, you had to join and fight for war. And this was a time when all the Ivy Leagues, like these men were the first ones to sign up. And now we look back at it and it's just like, this is kind of crazy how it was glorified. That it's a great idea, to be a real man, you got to call to war. Even if after the fact you're like, what was this about? For what? Who were the good guys?
I don't know if I would believe that Trump as a president would be saying things like that.
I agree with you. You're right.
So the story to me comes off as absurd, but I do think it's fair to say one thing that we're educated about relentlessly: World War II.
Yes.
When it comes to World War I. Yeah,
it's forgotten.
I actually remember when I was in school and we read a little bit about it, but it was read a little bit, but it's passed over almost immediately for World War II, and it's almost like World War I is used in the context of what led to World War II.
Right.
Like the Germans were upset about the debt and they felt they wanted retaliation and things like that, but we're not taught the history of all. There really is an overemphasis on World War II for sure.
Yes.
And I think there's good reason for it. But
it's an easy story to tell. There really is. That is good versus evil,
right?
Or good and evil versus evil, because Stalin's on our side.
Yeah. But they don't teach us necessarily. We don't get it hammered into us by our culture about how bad Stalin was.
And but we also don't get hammered into like a lot of the government and the press lied and manipulated us into a war, which 100 years later we can't explain why we were in, which led to the normalization of the idea of totalitarianism on American shores. And here's the other thing: Woodrow Wilson. There's a concept I call evangelical progressivism. I talk about this in my book. Then you write very heavily. And the premise is there's different kinds of leftism. It's not a monolith. And there's this evangelical strain. It's a fundamentalist faith. And Woodrow Wilson came out of that school, and which extends very much to this day. And the idea of there was something called the social gospel. And the social gospel is a very twisted idea. And it says, you don't take the Christian idea of saving an individual soul. You can save an entire nation, right? A nation has a spirit that has to be redeemed. Now, if you are going to redeem the spirit of an entire nation, that means everything in your life is on the table. The bedroom, the boardroom, on the street, everything is a vehicle for sin, and everything is therefore up to discussion. And he talked in literally messianic terms about how it's America's God. He's an extremely religious man. America's role to save the world. And when you have that trickle down 100 years later, it's like whenever there's anything going on, it's our responsibility, even if we really can't do anything about it. And everyone listening to this remembers not that long ago, if we weren't in Syria, all the Kurds would be killed. It was another Holocaust. And no one who said that has had any accountability for their lies in trying to get Americans to be overseas, dying in a war where it's not very clear who the good guys are again.
But we've had strong glimpses. Like I shouldn't even say glimpse. We've been smacked in the face with this when the New York Times lied about WMDs in Iraq.
Oh yes, of course.
And now there are kids who are preparing. I don't know if. What did they say? They're kids.
I got to interrupt you. Not just WMDs, that he's about to fire them. It wasn't that he had them. It's that he's about to use them. Iran is about to nuke Israel now for 20 years.
Yeah,
Any minute now. We laugh, but this has extremely.
Did you? So going back a little bit to the fact that the Atlantic's goal was to shift its cycle to benefit Trump.
Yeah.
One of the questions he got asked, Joe Biden, was, something like, are you concerned that peace agreements in the Middle East with Israel will destabilize Palestinians to, efforts for a two-state solution or something? And I'm like, are you literally trying to undermine peace agreements in the Middle East?
They are.
Absolutely.
Of course they are.
They're warmongers.
Yes, they cannot. Their bloodlust cannot be overstated. And I got to cut Joe Biden some slack because he did fight in World War I. So you got to, it's a little different for him. He remembers it when it was just Palestine.
I get it.
Yeah. I think. You mentioned Syria.
Yeah.
We're still in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
We still have a small. It's not the biggest presence, compared to where it was. I believe.
Why are we in Germany?
I mean, did we ever leave?
We never left.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
Are we still occupying Germany?
Yes.
I was watching this movie, The Resistance Banker.
Okay.
And I mentioned it several times now. It was a good movie. It's about this Dutch guy. His name was Van Hall. I forgot, William Van Hall, I think. I'm not sure. Okay. But he helped fund the resistance against the Nazis in the Netherlands. It's an amazing story about how he did this scheme to they backed up money for people once the government, which was in exile, came back. They'd pay back people this money. And I totally forgot where I was going with that because I started thinking about this movie and being cool and fighting against the Nazis. Oh, yeah. Anyway, so I'm watching this and I'm reading Wikipedia about World War II and stuff. And it's like, what happened at the end of World War II? The Allies occupied part of Germany. Then the Soviets occupied East Germany, and then I was like, oh, okay. And then I read about the Berlin Wall fell, and I'm like, and when did we leave Germany?
Yeah,
We didn't.
There's a great book called 1946, which is about what happens when World War II ends and Europe is a complete wasteland and how they rebuilt. And there's one story which no one talks about because it's weird. It doesn't fit the good guy, bad guy thing, which is the Czechs in Czechoslovakia. They took all the Germans or people of German descent, even people who lived there for 100 years, put a sign in their back that says German and made them walk.
Wait, what? Really?
Yes, they walked them get the F out of Czechoslovakia, and they walked to the border. Many died along the way. It was a trail of tears.
They were Germans?
Yes, any Germans in Czechoslovakia, get the F out.
Wow.
Yeah, and a lot of them died. And they were like, I've never been to Germany. I don't care. You can stay where you want. You can't stay here.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
but you know
crazy.
what? You can't, in one sense, it's like in 40 years, you guys have decimated this continent. Like, we have had enough of you people. And you're blaming the Jews for all this, too? You people are just horrible.
But that's racist, isn't it?
Is German a race?
I don't know. Ethnicist? Like those German people didn't do anything.
They did not. No,
Yeah.
they certainly did not.
They're just like regular people.
And many of them certainly
be
left
German.
Germany because they're like, I don't want to be around this.
Wow, man, that's brutal.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But everyone will always tell you that Europeans are much more moral than us, and we should aspire to be like Europe. You know,
Oh,
of course,
yeah, yeah.
every 5
Wow.
minutes you hear this.
Nonsense.
So it seems like the goal. I wonder if Trump not starting a new war is part of the reason why they hate him.
I think that it's not only that he's not starting a new war. We told you you have to start a new war. We told you if you don't do this, it's genocide, and you're waving your hand. No. That's not how this works. What works is we tell you where there's a problem, and you as president, as commander-in-chief, send the troops there and fix the problem. This has been the deal for over 100 years. What are you doing, Orange Man bad?
So is you know that story about the chimps in the study with the ladder and the fruit or whatever?
No.
So it's like they put 5 chimps in this room, and then they put like a step ladder or like a tall ladder, and they put fruit on top. And then anytime a chimp would climb the step ladder, they'd spray him with a hose.
Okay.
All the chimps would get sprayed. And so then eventually when a chimp would try climbing the ladder, the other chimps would grab him and beat him up. Like, you're going to get us sprayed with
Okay.
the hose, don't do it. Then they took one chimp out and put in a new chimp. That chimp that never got sprayed with the hose before. But when that chimp climbs up, the other chimps beat him up. One by one, they swap out all the chimps, never using the hose.
Culture, yeah.
And then the chimps just kept beating anybody who went near the
Yeah,
ladder,
yeah.
not knowing what the real
Yeah.
what was the punishment. I wonder if that's why there's this war machine. It's just the way it's always been. The people who started the process of just nonstop international war and conflict, well, they're dead. It's
Sure.
been a long time.
Sure.
And so now their grandkids are the ones being like, but we have to go to war.
But I don't think it's just a question of principle for them. I think it's a question of status. It's a question of wealth. It's a question of power. If I'm the guy who decides who lives and dies and can conquer the fates of entire countries, that feels pretty good to me. And then you have this moron in the White House. Who does he think he is? Where like this has been the process, and now you're coming in and turning over the apple cart. That's not how the rules work, buddy. Go back to New York.
Well, so let's expand this into
These people make a lot of money.
Oh, definitely.
And I think there's also a very sadistic thrill in knowing that you're responsible for sending so many people to their deaths.
But if the U.S. wasn't doing it, who would be? Would there would be someone in the Soviets they were doing these expeditions in other places. China's doing it now.
I don't think it's a given that there would be this kind of one world power and that has its fingers in every pot. I mean, if you look at, let's suppose, Kuwait, right? That was much more of a multinational operation. You had the U.S., you had Britain, but basically everyone was on the same page on that. It's not implausible that you would have this kind of coalition that would kind of make sure the borders are enforced, because it's useful for the powerful to maintain the status quo. It's like gang warfare. This is my turf. This is your turf. We shake hands. The problem is when you have actors in bad faith, like China, like what happened with Hong Kong, and that is something that all of us as Americans should be far more disturbed about than COVID, because
sure.
they are going to push the envelope until they get pushed back. And why wouldn't they?
Well, so if the U.S. So here's the arguments that I've heard, right? If we leave Afghanistan, there's 2 big problems. A humanitarian crisis.
Sure.
This is what Sean Parnell was saying. And I think it's true. He says all these people that helped us or sympathized, they're going to be dead. They're going to go and kill all these people. And we can't, what do we do? We don't just leave these people to die.
Sure.
And I'm like, that's a serious challenge. Although I think we've kind of created this mess for ourselves. We got to find a way out. The other issue is China moves in.
Yeah.
Now that there's a power vacuum, they can come in, they can take control of the territory and use it for strategic purposes or, for resources. And then China's already pushing into other parts of the world, South America, Africa. Are you familiar with what they were trying to do with the Nicaraguan canal?
No, I know they're pulling out of Africa to some extent, but please educate me.
So this was several years ago. That I believe the project fell through, but we essentially control the Panama Canal, which is very, very powerful. They wanted to just rip through Nicaragua. And that's massive. That's not Panama.
Yeah.
Panama is like,
by design. They've picked it for a reason, because it's the shortest one. Yeah.
But so they worked all these deals, and it would have apparently destroyed like this massive freshwater aquifer and decimated a lot of local population. Ultimately, it fell through, but they were moving towards this. The ultimate goal being they want to supplant us. They want they're pushing us out. And then the fear I have is, yeah, man, I hate these foreign, excursions or whatever you want to call them. The U.S. likes to hop around. The Syria thing. There's a lot of I guess I could call it speculation because I'm not a Middle Eastern policy expert, but like the Qatar-Turkey pipeline.
Right.
You're familiar with this?
Yes.
They're trying to build a natural gas pipeline up through Syria, through Turkey, into Europe to essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, offset the Gazprom gas monopoly in Europe. So this leads to war, all these conflicts. So I'm not a fan of us being like, we should get cheaper gas in Europe and Russia's, strangling us on this. So we want Syria to bend the knee to us. And then Syria says no. And then, oh, lucky for us, there's an uprising and the U.S. is on the side of the people who oppose this. But there is all that being said. What do we do if China is gaining territory and moving around and doing the things they're doing? They're quite literally running concentration camps.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I wrote the book on North Korea, so I am not at all a fan of the Chinese government and the North Korean government. This is something that's, my wheelhouse, and I've been, warning about this for many years, and thankfully the audiences have been extremely receptive to hearing this story. Honestly, what I would say, if the corporate press wasn't as depraved as it is, it would be very easy or moderately easy to get us to side with Russia against China. It would. There's been a very long history, decades long, of rivalry between Russia and China, between Mao and all the Russian leaders. It would be if we were combined against them, it would be pretty much unstoppable. But because the corporate press has made Putin, for no reason that's ever been explained, to be the worst dictator on earth, this has now become radioactive. And if Trump made moves to strengthen his relationship with Russia, which would benefit a lot of people, if Russia and the U.S. were teamed up in the Middle East, that would solve a lot of problems, because we could, between us, could sit a lot of these countries down, the more moderate ones, and be like, look, we're locking you guys in a room, figure it out, and they bang on the door till they'll let out. But it happened with UAE, and this could be the first domino.
You invite them to the rec center.
Yeah.
And then once they all come in, they realize both sides are there, but then you lock the doors.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. We do the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. So come back to check us out when we go live. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and we are also available on all podcast platforms for free if you want to listen to us there. Thanks for hanging out, and we will see you all next time.